Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode, I guess you could call it, of Veteran Voices in Code. I am here with an alumni, Tiffany Sidell. Thank you for joining us, Tiffany. I appreciate it. You get to have the honor of being the first solitary guest on this podcast endeavor we are embarking upon. The idea with these so far is to talk with people who have been in kind of specialty roles. We did an episode previously of all musicians who became software engineers, people who were in military bands and transitioned into software development. Our next episode was on linguists who then became software engineer. We have a little bit different theme today, and again, it's just you and me, which is great. But we're kind of here talking about people who came from a very different background, somebody who did something radically different, and what brought them to software engineering and why. So, Tiffany, thank you for joining me, first of all, and second, why don't you just tell us, where you started and kind of how you got here.
Sure. It's kind of an eclectic history, you could say. I actually was a linguist in the Air Force, so could have been on the last podcast as well. But after I got out of the service, I didn't want to continue being a linguist anymore. I wanted to move away from that, and I just kind of didn't know what I should do. I didn't have a lot of ideas. I didn't have any schooling really at that point. So I kind of just played around while being a stay-at-home mom on what I could plug myself into. And the medical industry was something that I fell into because it's always high demand. There's always a lot of positions open. And I do have a heart for people and communicating with them. So I just went that route. I ended up becoming a medical assistant, and I worked in that for years in various specialties and family practice. And then I ended up at the VA. And at the VA, they kind of had me do a split role between my medical assisting and then helping out behind the scenes with some of the administrative as well. And that's where I kind of started getting a glimpse into the software engineering side.
Okay.
And when I was younger, I mean, they didn't really push this kind of path as a career for us, maybe because it was newish still. I don't want to age myself here, but it was just not something offered to us when I was younger as a career path possibility. So then when I was in the medical, still, doing all those tasks and playing around with the software engineering on the side, it opened me up to pursuing this as a career option. And it just kind of fit better for in terms of what I wanted to do for my career satisfaction. And that's how I transferred into this role.
That's fantastic. And when you left the linguist side of the military, was it just kind of I want to get as far away from that kind of thing as possible? Or like, what was the motivation there? Was to just get away from linguistics in general, and I don't want to worry about different languages at all?
Well, no, not entirely. I think it was more so in order to do the linguist job, you needed to kind of stay in a few key areas. Like you needed to be on the East Coast and work in the skips over there, or you needed to move to very specific locations. And I didn't really want to be tied down to those spots, especially because at that time I was married to another service member, so I wanted to move to where they were.
Sure.
And getting into the just being stuck in the linguistic side, you only had a very few options to move around. So that's why I was playing with what else I could do after the military.
Fair, fair. Now, did you see any connection at that point? You said, something like software engineering was not even really on your radar. Did you see any possibility of when you were getting out, like this skill that you had developed to that point in linguistics, did you see any connection to anything in the outside world, or was it just like, I got to find something totally new?
Yeah, that was pretty much what it was like for me. I'm like, I know Chinese. What can I do with that? I mean, you
Besides
know,
work for the State Department, like,
right. If you know Spanish, I mean, at least you could do some
sure.
bilingual stuff. It's a little more applicable. But yeah, I was stuck with this language set and I knew how I achieved it, but I didn't know how to branch out and apply it to a different career field. So I was like, I can't be a Chinese linguist. What now?
Sure, sure. And so the medical field was the first one that kind of presented itself. And what drove you to that? Like, was it just, like you said, just an attraction to medical fields and the job security aspect of it? Was that primarily it?
That was primarily the reason for jumping into the medical field, yes. Because I admit I'm squeamish. When I first started out, it was a tough choice to make, but I wanted something that was easy to enter, that I could get into pretty quickly, and the VA was paying for that. Of course, I didn't know at the time I could apply it to other areas too, but
Sure.
yes,
Sure.
it was just kind of a very easy path into that career field. So that's what I was looking for, something I could jump into right away without thinking about it. And
Sure.
it did kind of align with my personality as well, since I do enjoy helping others.
Yeah, yeah. And do you think so? As you got into this field, being a medical assistant, was it like right away that you said, "Hey, I kind of want to do more than this," or did that idea slowly present itself of something, over time you realized that there were more options?
Yeah, so I was really satisfied with medical assisting for quite a while, just for that personal connection with others, but I still kind of felt unfulfilled in my career. I like very distinct successes, and, easy being able to see my achievements in a very tangible manner. So in medical assisting, yes, I'm performing well, but I don't have those tangible items I can put my finger on like I'm succeeding in this career field. And there's not a lot of critical thinking either. And I really like using my mind and kind of solving issues and problems. So I just wanted a little bit more of a challenge as far as what I should do with the rest of my career. Um,
Sure, sure. And at what point was it that you started to see, the tech world? At what point did you start seeing that as an option, and how did that present itself?
well, when I entered in the VA, they don't really have medical assistants doing in the VA what they do in the civilian side. So in the
Mm,
civilian side, I practice more like an LPN. Most
okay,
people are, more familiar with that side. In
sure.
the VA, they don't have medical assistants performing in that capacity. So they kind of have us doing a little more administrative work and
Mm,
scheduling. Um, so I kind of got stuck in a more administrative side and seeing some of these areas where I could help improve the workflows and processes behind the scenes with my medical knowledge. And that kind of integrated with my ability to catch on to computer programs pretty easily and work in the softwares that were given to me in the VA at that
sure.
time.
So at that point, you're working in this, you're integrating this with what you're doing already. At what point are you saying, "Hey, I want to understand how this works, how this actually functions, and is there a role for me here?" Is that kind of what happened with you, and just this desire to say, "Hey, I want to dig deeper into all these, pieces of software and understand how they work."
Yeah, so actually, I was working with the National Health Physics Program administratively, and I actually got a promotion into a higher GS level. And at that point, they started showing me some of their deficits in their technology. They're
Mm,
like, we're doing this, this, and this, but we don't have the software or the database to be able to do these things. You think maybe you could poke around at this? And they also had a website that was not functioning anymore because the previous position left and didn't training anybody how to pick that up. So that's how I kind of getting more into the tech side. I was like, yeah, I could pick this up. Started doing some self-learning on the side, just a little bit of HTML, CSS, JavaScript, just to get by with getting their website up and running. At that point, they're like, hey, can you look at, building our database for holding all of the information about the permits we have to issue? And it just kind of snowballed from there to a point where I'm like, whoa, I need to look at some actual, knowledge and schooling for this because I can't learn this all on my own.
you're opening a big can of worms there for sure.
Mhm.
Is that leading up to Code Platoon? Is that what prompted you? Just started saying, "Hey, I want more training in this." And how did you get from that point to Code Platoon?
Yeah, it was what prompted me. I'm like, okay, I can only learn so much from all these online tutorials. I don't even know where to look for half of these things. I don't know what knowledge is pertinent for me to learn to be able to perform in this role. So I actually reached out to some of the VA IT people that I knew in OINT, And one of them mentioned, hey, have you heard of vet tech? Because being in BA, we kind of get all that, inside knowledge of what programs there are for
Sure.
us.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So he pointed out vet tech, and he's like, hey, look into this. It's a pilot program. I don't know vet funding, what's there still or not. And I just kind of went through all the list of all the schools that I could look into. And Platoon stuck out to me because of the evening and weekend program,
Mhm.
because I was actively working in my other career field. And
Sure.
I wanted something I could squeeze in and still pursue this other option behind the scenes without giving up what I was doing at that time. So
Sure.
that's how I
Sure.
landed in Code Platoon. Just kind of fit.
Which is great, which is great. And tell it, so skipping ahead, let's skip ahead a little
Mhm.
bit for anybody watching. Tell us now that about your connection to evening and weekend and why that matters moving forward for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wanted to stay connected with Code Platoon anyways, and offered up to be a TA after I graduated from my cohort, which I did. I was the Echo evening and weekend TA. And then after that, it's a lot of commitment to be a TA. You're there every single day of the for every single lecture. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to put a pause on this, keep focusing on my career because I'm also brand new into my job and I want to
Mhm.
excel there. But then opportunity opened up where there was a role for an instructor in the evening and weekend program. And I was immediately like, yes. Actually, I was reached out to and like, hey, do you still have some interest in this? I'm like, absolutely, sign me up. Let me know what I need to do. So I just was offered and signed the contract to be an evening and weekend instructor. So
Which is
excited for
great.
that.
And I'm super excited for you in that regard. And again, we're kind of skipping ahead a little bit, but I wanted to
Mhm.
let people know that, we're talking with someone who not just went through the evening and weekend program, but it was such a good experience that you came back as a TA and now are coming back as an instructor, which is fantastic.
Mhm.
So going back to, you came to Code Platoon, you found this opportunity, you found it through vet tech, which unfortunately vet tech is kind of up in the air right now. Whether or not it
Mhm.
ever comes back, nobody really knows. Only the people in the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee apparently know, and it's just sitting there like a bump on a log, and we're all waiting.
Mhm.
Um, but that aside, so you came to Code Platoon, you found this, but you're working. So how did you manage that? How did you manage? Because the evening and weekend, and you can tell people like it's still fairly intense. Yes, it's
Mhm.
not the immersive program, but it's also not just. It's not like online college. It's not like, well, I just kind of knock out a paper when I get a chance, which is what I did a lot
Right.
of. So tell tell me how you managed that time. Like, how did you manage your schedule with working full time?
Yeah, it was very difficult, and I don't think I was fully prepared for that when I joined. But the support from the instructors and everybody at Code Platoon was great, and I'm glad I stuck with it. But you're working a full day, then you come home, you get maybe like a half an hour before you jump on for 4 hours in the evening. 3 times a week, and then your whole Saturday's gone. 6 months of a year. I mean, it's a long program. I kind of just I was lucky in my previous position that my supervisor allowed me to have, a little bit of time here and there to focus on some of the things I had learned. Since I was working in a kind of hybrid situation, I was able to take those things I was learning and applying it while on the job. But those days I couldn't, yeah, I just have to apply. Thankfully, Code in the evening and weekend, they give you a lot of time to be able to accomplish what you need to, um, and get that all done in that 4 hour chunk. You'll do some extra self-learning, but I mean, they do a really good job of offering you enough time to be able to grab these concepts and move on to the next and not get too far behind if you don't put in a ton of outside work.
That's good. That's good. Well, yeah, it needs to be manageable. And for those curious about this evening and weekend, and hopefully people stumble upon this if they're curious about the evening and weekend program, it is doable. And like you said, yeah, it's 6 months or of your life where a lot of extra time is needed. But it's also, I mean, I don't think I'm stretching when I say that this is like a bachelor's degree worth of knowledge
Mhm.
that is imparted upon someone in 6 months. So, to say that it's very intense for 6 months, well, yes, but you're coming out of the other side with an immense amount of knowledge and skill to carry that forward. So as you started down this path, and this is something I'm very curious about just in general, did you start noticing things from your past, like whether it be linguistic training or whether it was your knowledge in the medical field? Did you start connecting dots and start seeing,
Mm.
hey, this I can relate to what I'm doing here in JavaScript or Python or something like that to what I was doing in the past? Or was it completely foreign? Was it just like you're dropped off in the middle of the desert and you have no idea where you are?
No, there were a lot of connections. It probably spans from back in my linguistics times more so, but I mean, I applied it to my medical assisting and applied it to now, but I pick up patterns pretty easily. And anybody who goes into be a linguist, you have to take that test beforehand.
Mhm.
And it's not just language, it's your ability to see patterns and recognize those types of things and manipulate it and apply it. So it's that skill in and of itself has really spanned across all the career fields to be able to look at different medication names, but just recognize the patterns of those names and what things are related based on different prefixes and suffixes. So the same goes with code. You see, when you use certain, for loops, or, you want to do a while loop there, you see these patterns of where you use different excerpts and snippets of code and you just keep applying that.
Sure, sure. And I think that's where my curiosity lies with trying to do these episodes like we're doing now, is recognizing these patterns.
Mm.
Why do certain people gravitate towards these patterns and recognize these patterns better? Or is it just, random people just kind of end up here? Because we have a quite diverse background who come to Code Platoon, as you well know, people
Mhm.
from every possible military occupational specialty. We've got everything from special forces, door kickers, to air traffic controllers and weather technicians and linguists, like everything, medics. We've got the whole gamut. So I think it's fascinating to see how people make those connections. Now, let's ask this. Now you're transitioning into the instructor role. So offer up, if you could speak to your former self, someone who was in your position where you were, what would you say? What would you wish you had known that you didn't know then, but you could impart upon someone in that very same position?
Um,
Maybe from these patterns that you've picked up and you've recognized.
sure. I'm not sure if it necessarily has to do with that, but I would definitely say, I mean, coming from all of our backgrounds, I think a lot of us are used to excelling in certain positions, and then getting into this career field, it's so different, especially if you're making those changes. I would like to just tell myself that you'll get there. Like, it's a completely different way of thinking and looking at things. And you don't need to learn everything like to the T. A lot of times in a lot of past careers, you have to learn everything very specifically, but in coding, sometimes you just got to take what you can get and keep going, and eventually things will stick, and it's never ending learning. I mean, you're not going to learn it all. I'm still learning something every single day. So just to give yourself a lot of grace and a lot of patience, and you'll get there.
Sure.
But just keep plugging away, just keep absorbing everything you can.
And that's something I try to remind people all the time when they come to Code Platoon. Well, what do I specialize in? Well, you've got a long ways before you decide that, because, like you said, you're never going to learn it all. Nobody's ever going to be an expert in everything there is. A common theme I've seen with people coming to the world of software engineering and coding, and again, this is someone who, I am not a software developer myself at all. My background is in history and psychology, like the least tech focused areas you possibly can. But having that background, I'm fascinated by why people make the choices that they do and how they come to acquire these skills. I've noticed that there's a common theme among people who somewhat reluctant to embark on this as a skill and a career because they see it as maybe a mathematical or a scientific problem. And maybe they didn't do so well in math and science in school.
Mhm.
You've got a background that's kind of varied, let's just say, a little bit all over the place, which is great because that's how I am. What do you say to that person who looks at code and says, I wasn't good in algebra, or I wasn't good in science in school, so I'm not sure if this is for me. What do you say to that person, and how can they better think about that problem?
Um, well, it's definitely not like math. I feel it's more language based than math. You learn how to talk to the computer, which you don't need to know how to solve calculus equations to do that. You just find the script of how you are supposed to talk to the computer and how to make it understand what you're asking it. Which there's plenty of resources. Nobody needs to remember it all. You'll learn it and you'll learn to memorize it first, but you don't have to keep remembering it. There's plenty of guides and resources, libraries that tell you, hey, you want to ask the computer to do this, use this. And it's just kind of understanding, when to use in different situations. So that's more that problem solving versus using a math or science skill. So as long as
Sure,
you can kind of think through situations and solve that, that's
sure.
it.
And that's well said, because that leads into my next question, which is that, and personally, I feel that a lot of people forget often that science in general is a human endeavor, and that it is humans doing things with other humans to make science happen. So tell me a little bit about the lessons you've learned in the diverse background you have about how important communication is in the world of software, because there are an awful lot of people who believe that. I think a lot of people think that, well, a software engineer is just somebody who sits in their basement all by themselves and they're crafting all kinds of things. But and we all know in this world that teamwork and communication between peers is vitally important.
Mhm.
So what is your takeaway from that, as somebody from the military who sees that across different disciplines? How
Mhm.
important is that, and how much of a part of your daily life does that play?
I mean, I use that all the time. Being able to talk to different people with different backgrounds at different levels is so important. We have business owners that are requesting specific software enhancements, and you have to be able to understand what they're asking for. They may think they're telling you in a way that you understand, but you may not. You have to go back, discuss with them. So there's that communication between the business owners and yourself, but there's also the communication between you and your team member who may be working with you on the same thing. And you need to be able to approach them in a way that they can understand. I've said so many times in a way that I understand, but my team member still doesn't understand the same way. So I have to kind of figure out different ways to communicate that. But then
Sure.
we also work with multiple other tech teams. We have the DBAs, the server admins, I mean, multiple different specialties within the tech field, and they don't understand software development like we do, so we have to explain it in a way that they understand. But just being able to connect, I mean, in the military, we connect to all different levels, all different service um, careers, and being able to connect to them is just, it's half the battle. I mean, it's very important in this career for sure.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, I have a lot of people who I think they have the impression that it's just going to be this solitary endeavor, and it's just not. But I think that that's a good thing for every one of our students, because of the fact that we're coming from the military community, right? And everyone who's been through any kind of boot camp or training or anything like that, or spouses of military members, they know that that's a quintessential part of success in military operations. It's no different here. You might be disconnected. You might be working with somebody who's in Boston and you're in, Seattle or something like that. But it's hugely important. So one last serious question, and then we'll have like a fun question at the end. What are you doing now professionally? I mean, you just talked about how you're coming to Code Platoon to, as an instructor. What else are you doing professionally right now?
Well, right now I work for Southwest Power Pool, which is a regional transmission organization. So basically, in layman's terms, I'm trying to figure out the simplest way to say this. They manage the transmission grid to make sure, everybody's lights stay on. So they manage the generators and how much they can produce and based on how much load is being taken in by the customers. So I'm working as a programmer developer in the reliability side of that organization. And I work with vendor apps and custom apps just to make sure that those keep running as expected to support our mission.
That's great. I actually have my brother-in-law, my sister, or my wife's husband,
Hmm.
who works in the power industry as well. And I tell people this all the time. It's one of those, like, almost no one thinks about it when they talk about, reliable jobs and job sectors to go into. It's like, look into the power industry. We
Mhm.
need to keep the power on all the time. Look into it because usually it's reliable and it pays well. So that's
It's a
great.
very rewarding career choice too, I'll say. It's like impactful if you like impactful jobs for sure.
That's great. That's great. So like I said, one last fun question. Music to code to. What do you listen to when you're writing software, when you're developing? Do you listen to music at all, or is that no way?
I don't listen to music at all. If I do, I'll probably put on like a classical, I think it's lo-fi, is that what they're calling it
Yeah, yeah,
now, those
yeah,
playlists?
yeah.
But most of the time I have on a, a TV show in the background, just some random white noise of something I've seen before that I don't need to pay attention to.
You don't need to
Just,
be sure.
yeah. Maybe
No,
that comes from the linguistic days of always listening to Chinese. Just need to hear something talking in my ear.
well, that's great. That's great. And the reason I started bringing that up because we had, like I said, we had this episode with all the musicians, former musicians, and all of them agreed across the board they couldn't listen to music while they were doing this because it was too distracting. Like they get too involved in the music and they can't pay attention to what they're actually doing. I was just curious. Um, what just one last comment, what advice do you have someone who's considering Code Platoon? They're not sure,
Mhm.
maybe they want to do this, maybe not. They're really not sure if they can handle it. What do you say to that person?
I say just do it. I was so nervous to make this transition. And I even debated just not trying to get a job as a programmer afterwards. But I I just stuck with it, and leaned on career services, and it has been the most amazing change in my career history. I'm so thankful for it. So if you even have like the slightest, should I just do it? I mean, there's all sorts of programs and scholarships available through Code Platoon, so there's really no reason not to just try.
That's awesome. That's great advice. And for those paying attention, like imposter syndrome is a real thing in the tech world, especially. I wrote, if you Google Code Platoon and imposter syndrome, I wrote an article on this very subject. I encourage people out there to read that. But here's a summary for everyone who happens to stumble upon this. You are an imposter. Everyone is an imposter at whatever they're doing until they're not. And the only way you become not an imposter is by doing it, by engaging it. And exactly what Tiffany just said, just do it. Start doing it. And at some point, you won't be an imposter anymore. Just like all of us were in the military. At some point we raised our right hand. That didn't make me a soldier. I had to go through a whole bunch of other things. And then eventually, I jumped out of a few planes and it was like, I guess I'm an airborne soldier now. And, all these things happen, but you had to do them. You had to just engage and start. So exactly what Tiffany said, just start doing it. And at Code Platoon, one of the beautiful things is that we offer so much of this for free. You can start on this path for zero cost other than your time. Any parting thoughts? We only have a couple minutes left. So any parting thoughts at all?
No, I mean, building on the just do it, it may feel uncomfortable, but that's the best way to learn. Eventually, it won't be uncomfortable. Promise, I promise.
Yes, just like everything else. Well, Tiffany, thank you so much for joining me and offering your time, which we are greatly appreciative. And for those of you who stumble upon this, come check out the evening and weekends program. You'll get to meet Tiffany yourself and learn. We encourage you to try. We encourage you to give this a shot because we have a lot of alumni who are passionate about helping that next generation of software engineers, the people transitioning out of the military, trying to figure out what to do next. Here we have an example of somebody who tried several different things, just like I did. I'm in the same boat. I have a resume that's all over the place. And I ended up here, and it's great because I can help people make that decision on that next step for themselves as well. So again, Tiffany, thank you so much for your time. And hey, I look forward to just interacting with you more in the near future because part of the Code Platoon team officially. I love it.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you again. And yeah, tune in next time, and who knows who will be the next guest. I look forward to it. See y'all. Thanks, Tiffany.